Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sterling Live. My name is Caitlin Brower. I'm the Director of Public Relations and Social Media at Sterling, and I'm also your host of Sterling Live. I'm really excited to be back. We had a super busy April, took a little bit of time off in May, but now we're back. We've got a lot of episodes lined up for the summer months. So I'm really excited to be back here with all of you. So thank you in advance for tuning in or catching this, on demand later. So thank you again for joining. We have a great episode today, a really good, informative episode today. So I'll go ahead and introduce my guests. So today we have Amanda Osborne, Senior Investigative Analyst for Sterling Diligence, and Zach Nelson, Manager of Investigation for Sterling Diligence. On the bottom of our screen, you can see what our topic is today. And we're going to give you an overview of licensing and regulatory investigation. So again, a really informative episode, and I'm really looking forward to get into it. So Zach, Amanda, thank you so much for joining me today. I'd love for you to introduce yourselves to our audience. Zach, you are no stranger to Sterling Live. You're on your second episode, but will you go ahead and reintroduce yourself to our audience?
Certainly. So my name is Zach Nelson. I have been with Sterling Diligence a little over 9.5 years. I started off as an investigative analyst and have worked my way up to being a manager of investigations, overseeing quality review and client support.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us again. And Amanda, you're new to Sterling Live, your first episode, but we're excited to have you here. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure, of course. My name is Amanda Osborne. I'm a Senior Investigative Analyst with Sterling Diligence. I started with Sterling in 2005 and worked in learning and development and client support. And then in 2013, I moved over to Sterling Diligence. And I've worked extensively on our full suite of investigations, in particular regulatory and licensing background investigations.
So you're the perfect person for this episode, it seems. But thank you. No, welcome to Sterling Live. Really happy to have you here. Happy to have both of you here. I want to take a brief second. If you are watching live on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, if you have questions for Amanda and Zach throughout the episode, you can put them in the comment section across these three platforms, and I will get them over to these two as I see fit throughout the episode. So Amanda, you're going to be leading a lot of the conversation today, but Zach, I want to start with you for just an introduction question around Sterling Diligence. So can you briefly educate us on what Sterling Diligence is in relation to the standard Sterling that probably most of our audience watching right now knows?
Absolutely. So Sterling Diligence is the deep dive investigative arm of Sterling and has two main types of investigations. Our due diligence investigation, which are investigations mainly focused on investment-related transactions to help our clients assess their risk level through these transactions. And these types of investigations are for investment-related purposes only and cannot be used in any type of employment-related decision. Employment-related investigations fall under our executive investigations. These are utilized by our clients for, again, employment-related decisions. These investigations are governed by the FCRA and applicable state regulations.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I feel like we needed that. I know we've done a couple of episodes on Sterling Diligence, but definitely always need that little brief description at the beginning. So thank you for setting the stage for us there. Let's move more into the details now around licensing, and regulatory investigation. So, Amanda, let's further educate our audience. Can you explain the importance of licensing and regulatory investigation that Sterling Diligence conducts?
Sure. So from a compliance perspective, it's important for companies in financial industries, such as the mortgage industry, banking industry, and companies working with the transmission of money to be in line with regulatory requirements, especially as it pertains to obtaining and holding licensure in the states they operate in. As many of us have seen in the news, companies who don't have the appropriate regulatory framework in place do risk occurrence of adverse events, which may result in millions of dollars in fines or bad publicity. Part of the process that's put in place by regulatory agencies is to ensure the senior leadership and decision makers are fit to be in those roles and will not potentially cause harm to consumers through the actions of their company. And as a private investigative firm, Sterling Diligence can conduct these required background investigations for submission to financial regulators such as the New York State Department of Financial Services, the California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation, and the Texas Department of Banking, just to name a few.
So with everything you've just mapped out, and you said, you've been with Sterling for a while, what has changed in this environment over the years that you've been here?
So while there's been a continual need for regulatory background checks since I started with Sterling Diligence, I know there's been an increase in certain areas such as the cryptocurrency industry. And sometimes there are changes in policies and procedures. So for example, a few years ago, we had a change in the application process for many companies submitting information, and it moved to the nationwide multi-state licensing system. So that's just an example.
So you mentioned a couple of industries earlier, so like real estate, financial services, and I know you just brought up crypto. What are the circumstances that a client or prospects needs this type of report for regulatory purposes?
So clients who are under regulatory control, such as the aforementioned industries, mortgage companies, money transmitter companies, they're at times required to have a background investigation conducted on their employees and submitted by a private investigative agency such as Sterling Diligence to a state regulator. And this would be in order to comply with the terms of their license. So we work with a variety of companies and departments in order to conduct these checks. We may be working with licensing departments, with legal departments at a company, and we'll work with them on what's required to conduct the check. Common situations include a new application for licensure in a state the company may be operating in. Maybe our client is applying for a license as a mortgage transmitter or a mortgage company, and this is the first time. That may be one example. The company may also hold an existing license, but is appointing a new chief financial officer, chief executive officer, or director, and a background investigation is required in order to comply with the terms of their license. The other area we often see is that state regulators do allow certain aspects of the background check to be completed through their interface. However, if the individual has resided in a foreign jurisdiction within the past 10 years, then a background check may be required in that jurisdiction. And so as an investigative company, Sterling Diligence can move to those countries and complete an investigation there for submission to the regulatory agency. And then lastly, we may have a mortgage company who is appointing a new qualified individual as part of their license. And so a background check may be required in order to comply with the terms of their license in a state like New York.
I have a question that came in on LinkedIn. So again, thank you. If you are watching live and you have questions, please go ahead and submit them. I think this is a good question for those watching, maybe kind of deciding right now, oh, this is something I need. What makes Sterling Diligence stand out against other key players in the market?
So I would say we certainly have a strong global capability. That's one area that we are very well versed in. And so we can really work with companies who may have not had experience in a particular jurisdiction before in order to help guide them, because sometimes there's extensive documentation that may be required to conduct a check. There may be other aspects that are unfamiliar. And so we have extensive experience in that area, and we can help guide, especially for new applications or people who are just updating their current license in those areas.
Yeah, it's a key differentiator for sure. And actually, we'll touch on global a little bit more in the episode. But thank you for that. And again, please go ahead and submit questions if you have them. I have a question now that probably some of our audience members have, and it goes off of, Amanda, what you were just explaining, in regards to a client needing this type of report for regulatory purposes. So my question is, and Zach, please chime in first, and Amanda, we can hear from you. What is the difference between a standard background check and a due diligence investigation? I'm sure some people are just saying, can I just run a standard background check and get the same information?
Sure. So again, we are very much a deep dive part of the Sterling organization. Our investigations are assigned to a specific investigative analyst that handles the life cycle of the investigation. They are very manually intensive. We utilize primary sources as well as open record sources to provide a robust investigation on the subject. All of our records are reviewed manually to make a determination if they relate to the subject of the investigation. We don't just rely on automation that could miss something. Once we have completed our investigation, we provide a full written report with detailed information to the client that breaks down section by section, component by component of what we have done and what the findings were.
Amanda, do you have anything to add?
Going off. Yeah, definitely. Going off of what Zach said, there's a strong overlap between the two. However, one of the key differences is that the background investigation report for regulatory purposes, it has to come directly from a background screening firm and not the applicant company itself. So if you order a background check from us and you try to submit it yourself directly to the regulator, it will generally be rejected. And so Sterling Diligence will, as I said, provide directly to the state regulator, but we also provide a cover letter and our contact details in case the regulatory agency has any questions that they need to discuss on the background report. Another key difference is that in certain states, professional reference interviews are required, and these generally go into more depth experience about the subject. So it's not just a yes or no question answer interaction.
I think that that's definitely going to be helpful for our audience to understand those differences. So thank you both for that. Let's move into the actual investigations now. So Amanda, what are some of the ways that we're uncovering this information for like the components of the actual report?
Yes, so we follow a similar approach to a due diligence investigation. We're gathering jurisdictional details about a subject and consulting multiple sources of information, such as courts and available public records, to compile one report to submit to the regulatory agency. Many of these regulatory reports are focused on court records research in areas such as bankruptcy filings, civil litigation, criminal records, but they may also relate to things like a credit report summary and regulatory records. So we're not just conducting database efforts, and we'll go through court records and other sources to conduct a comprehensive analysis and triangulation of the data. The report goes beyond really just summarizing basic information, for example, about a civil filing, and we'll review court documents in order to provide and summarize a comprehensive analysis of relevant information about the complaint as well as other aspects.
From the sources that you just listed, what are some of the things that you and the team have uncovered from doing these investigations?
So most commonly, if there's relevant findings, they'll relate to things like civil litigation or prior regulatory involving the subject in their capacity as an officer or director of a company, especially as it relates to the mortgage industry. We've seen subjects who've been sued in their capacity as an officer or director, and it may be in something like a class action lawsuit. We've also uncovered civil filings that overlap with or stem from regulatory missteps by a company. And so one example would be a company reported to have hid underwriting deficiencies and underwriting problems, and the case may have been settled after extensive fines were levied, and a settlement was agreed to between a regulatory agency and the company.
Good examples. Let's move into compliance, because that's always a hot topic on, I think, every episode of Sterling Live. We're always talking about compliance. So obviously for the FCRA, that's for regulatory, for employment-based, related background checks. Does the FCRA apply to these investigations?
Yes, we're unable to conduct these investigations without the express written authorization. So we do require consent from the subjects in order to complete them. We also apply relevant state and federal guidelines to make sure we're adhering to the FCRA and state law.
And earlier, to kind of continue on this entire conversation of, the strategy behind the investigations, what we're finding, being compliant. You had mentioned, references earlier in the conversation. Can you expand on that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, so in particular with applications where a subject will be serving as a qualifier and they'll be overseeing the mortgage activities such as servicing and underwriting for the company, we have to ask specific questions of the references that really get into the in-depth experience of the subject. And so the references are provided by the subject to us, and we have to, before we even begin, make sure that the references demonstrate they fit the criteria to be able to serve as a reference for the individual, and that they can speak to and comment on their hands-on experience in the areas of underwriting and servicing. So as I said before, it goes beyond just yes, no answer and question interaction.
We have another question coming through on LinkedIn, and I think this could also be very, very beneficial for our audience to hear and to understand. What areas in your experience are you finding that clients have confusion, in the diligence arena? And then also, do you have a different process for diligence on individuals versus companies? So two-parter there. So where's the confusion? And then the different process for an individual versus an organization.
Sure. So if this is this from like a regulatory and licensing perspective? I know from that perspective, there may be confusion. I know we've seen with people trying to submit the background reports themselves. That's an example of thinking that Sterling as a company can give them the background investigation and then they themselves submit it. So Sterling Diligence, operating as the diligence arm of Sterling, we conduct these investigations, as I said before, and then Sterling Diligence will submit them directly to the regulator. We don't, as regulatory and background investigations, conduct the research on the company, but Sterling Diligence does offer company due diligence background investigations. So I can let Zach talk a little bit more about that in case that other aspect of the question needs further addressing.
Yeah,
sure. So as far as our process is pretty similar between individuals and companies. The main difference is that there are going to be certain types of searches we can do for individuals that do not qualify for companies, such as a criminal search. A criminal search is done on an individual. On a company, you're not looking at a criminal search on a company. You'd be looking at the C-level executives. Maybe we're behind the criminal aspects a company could be held. But regulatory wise, we're still going to be looking at that. If fines were levied against them, if there was civil action taken against a company, all of that type of searches will be continued the same between two of them.
Great. I love the questions coming in. If there's any more, send them in. So we did touch on this earlier from one of the questions we received from our audience, one of that differentiators being a global perspective. So Amanda, I'm curious if there's anything else that you wanted to add to the conversation around our capabilities from a global perspective.
Sure. So I wanted to add that Sterling Diligence conducts a lot of global investigations. And so as a whole, we're conducting them for due diligence, executive investigations, but we also can apply that to regulatory. And as I said, we are able to work with our clients up front about what additional documentation may be needed to complete in a foreign jurisdiction, so that towards the end of the investigation, we're not coming back and saying, by the way, we need this additional form. It's at the outset so that we can get the investigation completed in a timely manner.
All right. Well, that was all the questions that I had for the two of you. I want to open it up to our audience one final time. If you are watching live on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, and you have any questions, please go ahead and send them in because we'll wrap up here and do some final questions if there are any. Before we get any final questions, I wanted to just gather final thoughts from the two of you regarding today's episode, the topic, any questions that came in from our audience, anything you want to leave everyone with today. So Zach, I'll start with you on final thoughts.
So really, I just want to say that Sterling Diligence is very capable and able to handle any of your regulatory investigation needs or due diligence needs. We have an extensive team that is highly experienced and highly dedicated to what we do to meeting clients' needs and expectations.
Thank you. Amanda, final thoughts from you today.
Yeah, so there can be a lot of complex steps to the licensing process, especially for companies who are applying for licensure in the regulatory area for the first time. And so it's beneficial to have a partner for all background investigation reports who understand what's required and can fulfill all components of the investigation. And so Sterling Diligence has years of experience in this area, and that combined with our global capabilities makes us a great partner for our clients.
A great partner indeed, as we've heard throughout this entire episode, with all of the capabilities and how we can partner with your organization for success in these areas. So at this time, we have no further questions. So I want to close out by saying that, Sterling Diligence is also an approved vendor for conducting checks for the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, the NAIC. We're actually going to dive into the nuances of those types of investigations in an upcoming episode that's going to be in July. So please be on the lookout for that. Oh, and we actually did just have a question come in. So I wanted to leave on that little note, but just quickly for the two of you, if we can answer this quick. How long does a diligence investigation take on average in the US, and is it longer for a global investigation?
So on average, a U.S. investigation will take between 12 and 15 business days. That can vary depending on the complexity of the investigation, where the entity or individual could be located. So there are some factors that contribute to a 12 to 15 day turnaround time. For our global investigations, our average turnaround time is between 20 and 22 business days. And that's usually because we find in international jurisdictions, there's not a lot of records maintained like there are in the US, where we have to go to more institutions, more agencies, manually request records, wait for them to provide them back to us, as opposed to things being logged into a database, make the search, and get instantaneous results.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, now I think we're done with the questions. So I want to take the time to thank you both for joining me on this episode of Sterling Live. Like I said, we do have some other ones coming up, so please be on the lookout on all of our social media platforms so you can attend the next one. Thank you to our audience for tuning in live, but also those who are tuning in on demand as well. We appreciate you always tuning in. And with that being said, another great episode of Sterling Live. Amanda, Zach, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.